They thought it was just another routine note, but they were about to be tested in a way none of them expected. The office in Seoul was unusually quiet that morning, sunlight filtering through tall windows and casting long shadows over the polished mahogany table where Jin-ho, the Mafia boss with a reputation for calculated precision, sat surveying the room. His men, suited and tense, were gathered around a single sheet of paper resting in the center of the table, their brows furrowed, fingers drumming nervously against leather-bound folders. The note was written entirely in Russian, and the letters seemed almost to taunt them with their unfamiliarity. Whispers rippled through the room as each of Jin-ho's lieutenants tried, and failed, to make sense of the words, their panic growing with every passing second. The camera would linger on their hands, shaking, the slight flush of embarrassment creeping across their faces, and a subtle exchange of glances that betrayed their mounting anxiety. Amid the tension, the black maid who had been silently observing from the corner, moved with calm precision, her footsteps light against the hardwood floor. She reached for the note with steady hands, her dark eyes reflecting not just the morning light, but an unspoken knowledge, the kind of quiet assurance that comes from years of hidden dedication and meticulous study. No one had asked her for help. In fact, they had openly assumed she lacked the understanding to grasp the complexity before them. The air seemed to hold its breath as she held the note, the faint rustle of paper filling the otherwise silent room. Jin-ho's gaze, sharp and evaluating, followed her every move, though his expression remained inscrutable, hiding the flicker of curiosity that had begun to spark. Maya's lips moved slightly as she read the Russian text aloud, her pronunciation flawless, rhythmic, each syllable carrying weight, precision, and clarity that made the room's tension palpably shift. Her voice was calm, measured, and carried an authority that the panic-stricken men lacked. Cameras would capture the reactions in close-up, the widened eyes, the subtle drop of jaws, the realization dawning in slow motion that the knowledge they had assumed was beyond her grasp was effortlessly within her control. The lighting accentuated the contrast between the shadows of uncertainty among the men and the steady illumination that seemed to envelop Mai, highlighting not just her presence, but her unshakable composure. The soundscape was equally cinematic. The soft scrape of her fingertips on the paper, the distant hum of the city below, and the near silence in the room amplified the tension, making every movement feel consequential. Jin-ho's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, a subtle shift that marked the first acknowledgement of the power quietly wielded by the woman who had been underestimated. Every detail, the glint of sunlight on the polished table, the slight inhale of a hesitant subordinate, the rhythm of Maya's voice, worked together to create a tableau of unexpected authority and moral clarity. In that elongated moment, the world within the room seemed to pause, the ordinary routines of hierarchy suspended as the recognition of true competence and dignity quietly asserted itself. And so, without a single word of confrontation, the room's atmosphere transformed. What had been panic and mockery became a study in controlled respect, an unspoken acknowledgement that the ordinary measures of power could be subverted by intelligence, preparation, and calm resolve. And even as Mai finished reading, placing the note gently back on the table, the subtle shift in energy was palpable. Jin-ho's gaze lingered, a mixture of surprise and consideration, as if he were re-evaluating every assumption he had ever made about those he deemed subordinate. The moment stretched, unbroken and electric, a quiet prelude to the revelations yet to come, and it left every eye in the room fixated on Mai, silently recognizing that true understanding and skill could never be taken for granted. The room remained suspended in a rare stillness, every eye fixed on Mai as she carefully folded the note and placed it beside a sleek, polished coffee cup on the table. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried, each gesture conveying both grace and authority without a single word of explanation. Jin-ho leaned back slightly in his chair, the morning light catching the edge of his sharply tailored suit, revealing a subtle flicker of curiosity that contrasted sharply with the stern mask he usually wore. The other men in the room shifted uneasily, some adjusting their ties, others clearing their throats, all conscious of the newfound tension that I had introduced without any overt display of force. The subtle click of a pen being set down, the quiet scrape of a chair against the floor. These small sounds now carried an amplified weight as they punctuated the charged silence. My aware of, every gaze upon her, did not flinch. Instead, she allowed a faint, calm smile to touch her lips, a smile that acknowledged the unspoken acknowledgement of competence that had quietly spread among the onlookers. She took a measured step back, her posture impeccable, and for a moment, the room seemed to contract, focused entirely on her presence. Jin-ho observed, his fingers interlacing on the desk as he processed the situation. The usual assertive authority of a Mafia boss replaced with a contemplative stillness that few had ever seen. The men exchanged glances, an unspoken conversation passing between them, each of them beginning to realize that the hierarchy in this room had subtly shifted. Mai had not demanded recognition. She had earned it through knowledge and poise, and the effect was immediate and undeniable. The lighting played its role in emphasizing the gravity of the moment, sunlight streaming through the blinds and creating patterns that danced across the floor, accentuating the contrast between those who understood the weight of what had just occurred and those still grappling with it. Even the subtle hum of the city outside seemed to recede, as if the world itself had paused to witness the quiet assertion of dignity and intelligence. Jin-ho finally spoke, his voice measured and low, a rare softness underlying the usual precision. He asked a single, simple question, not to challenge, but to understand, and Mai responded with clarity and depth, her answers revealing not only linguistic skill, but a broader awareness that seemed to encompass the entire situation. Every nuance, every carefully chosen word, resonated in the room, drawing attention to the way true understanding transcends appearances and assumptions. As the conversation unfolded, the men who had moments before been in a state of mild panic began to straighten their posture, their unease giving way to a quiet respect. The subtle shift was palpable, the atmosphere lighter yet charged with a recognition that had not existed before. Mai's calm demeanor and mastery of knowledge had redefined the expectations in the room, subtly altering the power dynamics, without confrontation or spectacle. Jin-ho watched her closely, a newfound consideration in his eyes, realizing that the measure of authority was not merely in position or title, but in the ability to command respect through intellect and composure. The room, though outwardly calm, was alive with a silent acknowledgement of this lesson, an understanding that would linger long after the morning sun had climbed higher in the soul sky. And in that quiet moment, Mai stood with a presence that was impossible to ignore, the room recognizing the quiet, unassailable strength of intelligence and integrity. The subtle tension that had settled in the room after Mai's calm reading began to transform into a quiet curiosity, as if everyone present was recalibrating their understanding of what authority truly meant. Jin-ho leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on the polished surface of the mahogany table, his eyes narrowing with a mixture of interest and contemplation. The sunlight slanting through the blinds highlighted the sharp lines of his face, and for a moment, the usual air of unyielding control seemed to soften just enough to let a hint of genuine intrigue shine through. Mai, standing with poise at the side of the room, allowed her gaze to sweep over the men who had been flustered only minutes before, her expression calm, yet knowing, conveying that she understood not only the contents of the Russian note, but also the dynamics of power and perception that were unfolding. Each of Jin-ho's men now watched her with a mixture of awe and silent acknowledgement, their previous panic replaced by a respectful attentiveness that spoke louder than any words could. The faint hum of the city beyond the windows seemed to fade into a background whisper, leaving only the resonance of intellect and composure that Mai carried with her presence. The note itself lay innocuously on the table, a simple sheet of paper that had catalyzed a profound shift, its significance magnified by the calm authority of the woman who had interpreted it flawlessly. Jin-ho's fingers drummed lightly against the desk, a subtle rhythm that mirrored the internal calculations running through his mind, each beat a measure of the respect and strategic appreciation he was beginning to assign to Maya's unexpected mastery. As she offered a brief, clear explanation of the implications contained within the note, her voice carried both precision and a gentle insistence on clarity, reinforcing her position not just as a knowledgeable interpreter, but as someone whose judgment deserved careful consideration. The room, once dominated by tension and unspoken uncertainty, now seemed to orbit around Maya's quiet command of the situation, the lighting accentuating the contrast between her steady presence and the flustered, tentative movements of the men who had underestimated her. A slight shift in posture, a pause in breath, even the way a hand rested on the edge of the table, all communicated a new hierarchy based on respect earned through competence rather than position or intimidation. Jinho's eyes lingered on Mai with a renewed interest, his mind tracing the strategic value of her abilities and the implication for the operations he oversaw, recognizing that the insight she provided went beyond mere language skills and touched on judgment, perception, and composure under pressure. The subtle energy in the room was palpable, the silence between exchanges filled with an unspoken agreement that a lesson in dignity and capability had just been delivered. Even as the moment stretched, time itself seemed to bend, holding the quiet recognition that what had appeared to be a minor detail, the Russian note, had revealed the profound depth of Maya's intelligence and character. The soft interplay of light and shadow, the delicate resonance of sound in the quiet office, and the unbroken eye contact shared among those present all contributed to a tableau of silent admiration, a recognition that the ordinary measures of authority could be recalibrated in the presence of quiet mastery. In this charged yet composed atmosphere, Mai stood firm, her steady presence commanding attention without assertion, teaching in the most cinematic of ways that intellect and integrity can elevate respect and shift perceptions without a single act of overt demonstration. As the morning sun continued to illuminate the office in soft, golden beams, the subtle atmosphere of respect that Mai had cultivated began to settle into a tangible shift within the room. Jinho remained seated, his eyes following her every movement with a quiet, analytical intensity that contrasted sharply with the flustered energy that had dominated only moments before. Mai approached the table with measured steps, each footfall a testament to her composure, and lightly adjusted the position of the Russian note, ensuring it lay perfectly aligned with the edge of the polished mahogany surface. Her gestures were deliberate but gentle, conveying an unspoken message that control and mastery could exist without overt assertion. The other men in the room, once tense and uncertain, now observed her with a combination of admiration and curiosity, their expressions softening as they processed the realization that her expertise and insight were both genuine and profound. The subtle play of sunlight on the table highlighted the contrast between the calm authority that Mai exuded and the tentative postures of those around her. The scene capturing a moment of silent acknowledgement that knowledge and dignity could command attention more powerfully than titles or position. Jinho's hand rested lightly on the desk, his fingers tapping a slow, thoughtful rhythm that mirrored the pace of his contemplations, each movement a quiet measure of the respect and strategic appreciation he was beginning to ascribe to Maya's presence. As she spoke again, explaining the broader implications of the Russian note with clarity and precision, the room absorbed every word, each syllable reinforcing the subtle hierarchy that had emerged. The men who had moments before shown signs of panic straightened, their unease transforming into attentive focus, a silent acknowledgement that the woman standing before them was a force defined not by authority imposed, but by competence demonstrated. Maya's calm, deliberate explanations and poised presence created a rhythm in the room, the subtle sound of her voice punctuating the soft ambience of the office, a quiet but commanding influence that reshaped perceptions and redefined expectations. Jinho observed closely, noting how her intelligence and clarity of thought illuminated gaps in understanding and strategy that had gone unnoticed, recognizing that her insights offered not only a solution to the immediate problem, but a perspective that could influence decisions and planning going forward. The air in the office seemed charged with the realization that genuine expertise and unassuming confidence could shift dynamics without conflict. Every detail from the tilt of Maya's head to the precise articulation of each word reinforcing the principle that dignity and skill earned attention and respect. Even the subtle background sounds, the distant hum of traffic in Seoul, the faint rustle of papers, became part of the tableau, emphasizing the contrast between the calm control she exercised and the stillness of the room awaiting her next move. The soft shadows cast by the morning sun accentuated the depth of her presence, turning the ordinary office space into a cinematic frame where the quiet assertion of intellect and composure took center stage. Jin-ho's gaze lingered, his expression unreadable yet thoughtful, as if he were cataloging every aspect of Maya's performance, mentally recalibrating assumptions and recognizing the quiet authority she wielded through knowledge and poise. The scene held, unbroken and charged with understated power, every participant aware of the subtle transformation occurring in the space, a moment where respect and recognition were earned without a word of command, leaving a lingering impression that intelligence and integrity could quietly, yet decisively, shape perception and influence outcomes. The room remained in a delicate balance of quiet awareness, the morning sun shifting across the polished surfaces and casting a warm glow that highlighted the subtle expressions on each face present. Mai moved with deliberate grace to the side of the table, her dark eyes calm and unwavering, taking a slow breath as she considered the implications of the note she had just translated. Jin-ho watched her closely, noting the steady cadence of her movements, the precision in every gesture, and the clarity in her voice as she explained the next steps, all without raising her tone or demanding attention. The men who had moments before shown signs of panic now leaned in slightly, attentive and respectful, absorbing every word, every nuance of explanation, and every unspoken message carried by Maya's posture and presence. The office, though outwardly ordinary, had transformed into a stage where intellect and composure commanded the space, and the hum of the city beyond the windows seemed to soften, as if acknowledging the shift in energy. Jin-ho's fingers rested lightly on the table, drumming a slow, thoughtful rhythm that mirrored the internal evaluation of the situation, his mind tracing the depth of Maya's knowledge and the subtle authority she exuded. The light filtered through the blinds, highlighting the contrast between the calm certainty in Maya's expression and the tentative, almost awed, glances exchanged among the men. Each word she spoke was measured, clear, and precise, reinforcing her position not as an outsider, but as someone whose insight held tangible value, whose competence demanded recognition. The air in the room carried a quiet tension, the kind that is filled with expectation rather than fear, a sense that every individual present was recalibrating assumptions and silently acknowledging the lesson in poise and capability being demonstrated before them. Jin-ho finally allowed a small nod, subtle yet loaded with unspoken acknowledgement, the first visible sign that he recognized Maya's contribution as both authoritative and invaluable. The men around the table straightened, their prior uncertainty replaced by a careful attentiveness, each realizing that intelligence and preparation could surpass assumptions based on appearance or perceived rank. Maya's composure remained unwavering, a testament to the quiet power of dignity combined with expertise, and even as she offered further clarification on the contents and consequences of the Russian note, her calm voice carried an unspoken lesson. Respect is earned through competence and character. The room seemed to breathe as her explanations concluded, a pause that allowed the significance of the moment to resonate fully, leaving each person with a lingering awareness of the shift that had occurred. Jin-ho's gaze lingered on her, evaluating, reconsidering, and quietly appreciating the depth of skill and intelligence that had gone unnoticed before, the subtle shift in power dynamics marked not by confrontation, but by demonstrated ability. The soft patterns of sunlight across the floor, The subdued echoes of paper and furniture, and the poised, deliberate movements of my combined to create a cinematic tableau, a moment where intellect and composure quietly, yet decisively commanded the attention and respect of all present. In this stillness, the room recognized a new equilibrium, one defined not by hierarchy alone, but by the undeniable presence of knowledge, foresight, and unwavering dignity. The quiet intensity that had settled over the office began to deepen as Mai continued to navigate the situation with deliberate calm, her every gesture and word reinforcing the quiet authority she had established. The sunlight through the blinds shifted slowly, casting long, thin shadows across the polished mahogany table, tracing the lines of the room and highlighting the subtle expressions that flitted across the faces of Jin-ho and his men. Each of them had moved from initial panic to careful observation, their bodies still, yet their minds racing to process the new reality before them. Mai's voice, steady and precise, carried over the soft hum of the city outside, each word measured, deliberate, and weighted with clarity that demanded attention. Jin-ho's gaze followed her with unwavering focus, the slight narrowing of his eyes indicating a mixture of respect and intrigue, an acknowledgement that the assessment of competence and insight was far deeper than he had anticipated. The Russian note lay before them, innocuous yet now transformed into a symbol of insight and capability, its significance amplified not by force, but by the skill and intellect of the woman who had interpreted it so flawlessly. The room's subtle acoustics captured the faint rustle of papers, the soft scrape of chairs as the men shifted slightly, all underscoring the unspoken tension and the careful recalibration of hierarchy. Mistipet gelo to the table, adjusting her posture just enough to convey attentiveness without assertion, her calm demeanor radiating confidence that seemed to ripple through the room. Every glance exchanged among Jin-ho's men carried a quiet acknowledgement of her presence and the lesson imparted not through command, but through demonstration of skill, intelligence, and composure. The lighting in the room seemed to accentuate the contrast between her poised figure and the previously unsettled expressions around her, transforming the ordinary office space into a cinematic stage where intellect quietly commanded respect. Jin-ho's hand tapped lightly against the desk, a subtle metronome to his contemplation, each beat marking his growing recognition of the value of insight, observation, and calm authority. Mai explained the broader implications of the note, her language clear, her reasoning logical and measured, allowing the men to follow without confusion, the room collectively absorbing not only the content, but also the demonstration of thoughtful execution. The subtle interplay of light, shadow, and movement, combined with the rhythmic precision of her voice, created a cinematic atmosphere in which knowledge and dignity held tangible presence, a quiet lesson in how intelligence and preparation can redefine perception and command attention. Jin-ho, observing closely, recognized that the authority displayed by Mai transcended simple obedience or position, embodying instead a measured, thoughtful capability that demanded both respect and consideration. The men, once flustered, now mirrored a more composed attentiveness, their posture, gaze, and slight movements reflecting the acknowledgement that mastery could be silent yet undeniable. The scene held, unbroken, as Mai concluded her explanation, a moment charged with the recognition of skill, the quiet assertion of intellect, and the re-establishment of respect and equilibrium, a testament to the enduring power of calm competence and understated dignity that left an indelible impression on every observer within the sunlit room. The realization of Mai's capability continued to settle over the room like a slow, deliberate tide, reshaping the atmosphere with a sense of quiet reverence. Jin-ho shifted slightly in his chair, the sunlight tracing the contours of his face and emphasizing the subtle flicker of curiosity and respect in his eyes that had been absent before. Mai, sensing the full attention of the room, allowed her posture to remain relaxed yet assured, her dark eyes glimmering with the calm authority that had transformed mere confusion into focused understanding. Each of Jinho's men now observed with a newfound patience. The tension of panic replaced by a quiet attentiveness, their movements measured, as if the room itself had slowed to match the rhythm set by Maya's composed presence. The Russian note, once a source of unease, now lay innocuously on the table, a silent symbol of the transformative power of knowledge and dignity. Mai spoke again, her voice steady and deliberate, weaving clarity and insight into every phrase. And as her words unfolded, the room absorbed them with an unspoken acknowledgement of her unassailable intellect. Jinho's gaze lingered on her, analyzing, weighing, and cataloging each subtle gesture and measured syllable, recognizing the depth of her understanding and the quiet strength with which she navigated the space. The sunlight shifted across the polished surfaces, casting elongated patterns across the floor that seemed to mirror the measured flow of the conversation, emphasizing the contrast between the calm authority of Mai and the tentative awareness of the men surrounding her. Every small sound, the faint scrape of a chair, the soft shift of weight, the almost imperceptible intake of breath, served to underline the gravity of her quiet influence and the attentive stillness that she had cultivated. Maya's explanation expanded, connecting the nuances of the note to larger implications with a clarity that drew the attention of everyone present, and the room remained absorbed in her presence. A single, collective acknowledgement that her competence demanded recognition without the need for assertion. Jinho's fingers tapped lightly against the desk, a subtle metronome marking his contemplation as he absorbed the depth of her insight, the precision of her thought, and the calm authority she exhibited. The men, once uncertain, now mirrored her steadiness in their posture and focus, their eyes tracking her movements and listening intently. The subtle shift in energy marking the emergence of respect founded on intellect rather than title. The interplay of sunlight, shadow, and deliberate gestures created a cinematic tableau, each element reinforcing the notion that true understanding and composure could command attention and recalibrate hierarchy quietly and effectively. In that sustained stillness, every participant in the room recognized the power of mastery exercised with dignity, the quiet demonstration of skill that elevated respect and subtly transformed perceptions, leaving an indelible impression that would linger long after the immediate challenge had been resolved. The quiet energy in the office shifted subtly, a new layer of attentiveness settling over the room as Mai continued to stand with composed grace beside the polished mahogany table. Jinho's eyes followed her every movement, the sunlight streaming through the tall windows, tracing the sharp angles of his face and highlighting the faint, thoughtful furrow in his brow that suggested he was processing far more than the contents of the Russian note. Maya's voice carried clearly, measured, and deliberate, articulating not only the words on the paper, but the implications hidden beneath each phrase, a careful mapping of insight that drew the full attention of everyone present. The men who had been tense only minutes earlier now leaned in, their postures straightening as they absorbed the precision of her explanations, and the subtle shifts in their expressions reflected a growing respect for the calm authority she embodied. The room, bathed in the warm morning light, seemed to hold its breath. Every sound, soft rustle of papers, the faint scrape of chairs, the distant hum of the city, becoming accentuated in the charged stillness, a testament to the presence Mai projected. She stepped forward slightly, her movements deliberate and unhurried, as if she had all the time in the world, each gesture reinforcing the sense that her understanding and insight were not to be questioned lightly. Jinho's hands rested on the polished surface of the table, fingertips tapping in a subtle rhythm, mirroring the measured cadence of thought he was giving to her interpretations. Each tap a silent acknowledgement of the quiet authority she wielded without need for overt command. The sunlight shifted slowly, highlighting the contrast between her poised figure and the tentative, odd expressions of the men around her, creating a visual tableau where intellect and composure commanded attention more than position or title. As Mai elaborated further, explaining the potential consequences and nuanced meanings embedded in the note, The room absorbed every word, the careful clarity of her language providing a roadmap that transformed confusion into understanding and hesitance into acknowledgement of competence. The men who had earlier shown signs of panic now mirrored a quieter, more deliberate attentiveness, their eyes tracking her, their bodies still but alert, their unspoken recognition of her mastery evident in every subtle movement. Jin-Ho's gaze softened slightly, the faintest shift in expression suggesting a reconsideration, a silent concession that intellect and calm decisiveness could redefine influence within the room without the need for authority to be asserted forcefully. The interplay of light and shadow continued to underscore the cinematic tension, emphasizing every subtle gesture, every nuanced expression, and every carefully measured syllable. In that moment, the office, ordinary in form but extraordinary in the dynamic now present, became a study in how knowledge, composure, and understated confidence could quietly command attention, reshape perception, and establish respect, leaving an indelible impression that extended beyond the immediate moment and subtly rewrote the rules of engagement for all who witnessed it. The atmosphere in the office shifted further, settling into a rhythm of concentrated awareness as Mai continued to command attention with the quiet authority of her presence. Jin-Ho's posture remained attentive yet composed, the sunlight catching the edges of his tailored suit and tracing the subtle expressions of curiosity and respect that had been growing steadily over the past minutes. Mai moved slightly closer to the table, her steps measured and purposeful, each one reinforcing the calm confidence that had transformed the room from one of tension to a space of focused engagement. The Russian note rested quietly on the polished surface, its importance magnified not by any inherent threat, but by the clarity and insight Mai provided through her careful interpretation. Her voice carried easily across the room, deliberate and precise, conveying each nuance and implication without haste, allowing everyone present to follow her reasoning clearly and without confusion. Jin-Ho's eyes tracked her, noting the steadiness in her gestures, the careful modulation of her tone, and the confident yet understated way she held the attention of the room, all signaling a mastery that was both intellectual and perceptive. The men who had previously been tense now mirrored the attentiveness she had cultivated, their body language shifting from unease to a quiet readiness, their eyes following her, absorbing the subtle lessons embedded in her calm demeanor and articulate speech. Light streamed through the tall windows, casting long patterns across the floor and across the faces of those present, emphasizing the contrast between the composed assurance of Mai and the tentative realization of her colleagues. Every subtle sound, the faint rustle of papers, the soft scrape of a chair, the slight intake of breath, was accentuated in the stillness, underscoring the weight of the moment and the impact of quiet competence. Mai's explanation extended beyond the immediate content of the note, providing insight into potential implications and strategies, her words carrying a clarity that illuminated understanding in real time. Jin-Ho's fingers tapped lightly against the desk, a measured rhythm reflecting his internal evaluation and growing appreciation for the way she had transformed the room's energy without confrontation or display of authority. The men absorbed her every word, the subtle shift in power and respect evident in their posture, their gaze, and the quiet attentiveness that had replaced prior uncertainty. The sunlight, moving gradually across the office, cast shadows and highlights that accentuated the cinematic quality of the scene, framing Mai as the focal point of calm mastery amidst a room of thoughtful observers. Her measured, confident presence had established a new equilibrium, a silent assertion of intellect and capability that shaped the perception of all present without a single directive, teaching that true authority is earned through skill, clarity, and unassailable dignity. As the moment stretched, the office seemed to breathe collectively, the energy steady, charged with the acknowledgement that knowledge and composure had shifted the atmosphere entirely, leaving an indelible impression on Jin-Ho and his men, a reminder that calm, precise mastery can quietly but decisively command respect and influence outcomes. The quiet resonance of respect that Mai had cultivated throughout the morning began to crystallize into a palpable shift in the room's energy, the sunlight stretching longer across the polished floor and casting defined lines across the walls and faces of those present. Jin-ho remained seated, his sharp gaze following her movements with a focused intensity that revealed both contemplation and subtle admiration, a recognition that the authority she displayed was grounded in skill, insight, and composure rather than position alone. Mai moved with careful deliberation, adjusting the placement of the Russian note on the table with precision, her actions fluid and unhurried, reflecting a deep sense of control and measured confidence that drew the attention of everyone in the room. Her voice continued to articulate the intricacies of the note, each word clear, deliberate, and weighted with meaning, guiding Jin-ho's men through a landscape of understanding that they had previously approached with uncertainty and unease. The men shifted subtly in their seats, the tension that had initially gripped them dissolving into attentive observation, their movements now mirroring the measured calm that Mai exuded, and their expressions softened with the dawning comprehension that authority could manifest quietly through knowledge and poise. The office itself, ordinary in design but transformed by the interplay of sunlight, shadow, and deliberate human presence, became a stage for subtle lessons in respect and recognition. Every detail, the faint rustle of paper, the gentle scrape of a chair, the light tapping of Jin-ho's fingers on the table, amplifying the weight of the moment. Mai's explanations extended further, her reasoning clear and structured, connecting each aspect of the Russian note to broader implications and demonstrating an understanding that exceeded expectation, highlighting the quiet intelligence that had so thoroughly shifted the room's dynamics. Jin-ho's eyes lingered, observing the calm authority with which she commanded attention and guided comprehension, his usual mask of impassivity replaced by a subtle softness that suggested a reconsideration of assumptions and a growing respect for her mastery. The sunlight highlighted the contours of her composed figure against the polished surfaces of the office, emphasizing a visual contrast between her assured presence and the previously uncertain postures of the men around her. Every word she spoke resonated in the room, the clarity and precision of her articulation reinforcing the message that competence and integrity were powerful forces capable of commanding attention and respect without overt assertion. The men's postures adjusted almost imperceptibly, their expressions reflecting both acknowledgement and a silent internalization of the lessons presented through her actions and insight. Jin-ho's fingers tapped a rhythmic cadence, reflecting the deliberate assessment of the strategic value and intellectual depth displayed by Mai, and his eyes tracked her every movement with a newfound consideration. The atmosphere, filled with subtle light, sound, and the quiet hum of understanding, crystallized a moment of recognition that true authority and respect could emerge from intellect, preparation, and composure, leaving an indelible impression on all present and establishing a subtle yet irreversible shift in perception, hierarchy, and recognition within the office as sunlight continued to illuminate the poised figure of Mai, quietly commanding attention, respect, and an unspoken acknowledgement of mastery. The office remained immersed in a quiet intensity, the sunlight continuing its slow drift across the polished surfaces, illuminating the subtle interplay of expressions and movements that now defined the room. Mai stood with composed elegance near the edge of the table, her dark eyes calm and observant, every gesture purposeful yet understated, conveying a mastery of the situation that needed no assertion. Jin-ho watched her with a measured focus, the sharp lines of his face softened by the recognition that authority and insight could manifest through intellect and presence, rather than mere position. The men around the table, once flustered by the Russian note, now leaned in attentively, their postures straightening and their eyes reflecting a dawning respect for the woman who had quietly recalibrated the energy of the room. The note itself rested innocuously on the polished wood, Yet its significance had grown exponentially through Maya's careful translation and explanation, its implications now fully understood by all present. Every subtle sound, the faint rustle of papers, the soft scrape of a chair, the deliberate tap of Jinho's fingers, resonated within the office, reinforcing the attentive stillness that Maya had cultivated. She spoke once more, her voice calm, deliberate, and precise, articulating the broader context and potential consequences of the note, guiding the room through a web of understanding that left no ambiguity, each word weighted with clarity and insight. The sunlight accentuated her presence, highlighting the poised lines of her figure against the gleaming surfaces and casting a quiet glow that underscored the cinematic quality of the moment. Jinho's gaze lingered, analytical yet softened by the recognition of her composure and skill, each subtle movement she made reinforcing the lesson that competence and dignity commanded attention and shaped perception without overt assertion. The men absorbed every nuance of her explanation, their prior uncertainty replaced by attentive observation, a silent acknowledgement that the dynamic of influence in the room had shifted imperceptibly but decisively. The interplay of light, shadow, and human presence created a tableau in which knowledge and calm mastery held tangible authority, guiding the flow of thought and focus throughout the office. Maya's demeanor remained steady, her posture relaxed, yet commanding, each measured step and deliberate phrase reinforcing the subtle power of quiet competence. The room, though outwardly composed, held a new energy, a combination of respect, attention, and understanding that crystallized in the presence of her intellect and poise. Every individual present felt the shift, a collective acknowledgement that mastery and insight could quietly redefine relationships and hierarchy, creating an environment where careful thought, preparation, and composure prevailed over assumption and haste. Jinho's fingers continued their soft tapping, a metronome of consideration as he processed the depth of her insight, the subtle authority she wielded, and the enduring impression of intelligence and calm decisiveness that had transformed the office into a space where respect and recognition were earned silently, but undeniably. The scene stretched in quiet continuity, the sunlight shifting gradually, the office alive with the understated affirmation that true competence, clarity, and dignity could command attention and subtly alter the understanding of all who witnessed it. The room had settled into a profound stillness, the sunlight filtering in through the tall windows, casting warm highlights across the polished mahogany surfaces, accentuating the calm focus that had permeated the space since Maya had begun to demonstrate her insight. Her presence had subtly transformed the energy of the office, and even the faint hum of the city beyond the glass seemed to fade, leaving a quiet resonance that emphasized the weight of the knowledge and composure she conveyed. Jinho's gaze remained fixed on her, absorbing the clarity in her explanations, the deliberate precision of her voice, and the effortless manner in which she navigated the intricacies of the Russian note. The men around the table, their previous unease now replaced by attentive focus, adjusted their posture, their subtle movements reflecting a deepening understanding and the respect that was silently being earned through intellect rather than command. Maya's every gesture, from the slight repositioning of her hands to the measured steps she took across the office floor, radiated calm authority, reinforcing the subtle yet undeniable influence she had established. The note itself lay quietly on the table, its contents no longer a source of tension, but a catalyst for the demonstration of her skill, and the room absorbed the significance of her interpretation with a mix of concentration and admiration. Light and shadow played across the faces of those present, highlighting expressions that had shifted from doubt and uncertainty to acknowledgement and appreciation, a visual representation of the recalibration in perception that had taken place. Jinho's fingers tapped lightly against the desk, a measured rhythm that reflected the internal processing of the strategic and intellectual implications of her performance. Each tap a subtle tribute to the insight and composure she displayed. Mai spoke again, articulating broader implications with clarity and precision, connecting details to larger concepts in a manner that made complex ideas accessible. Her calm and deliberate voice guiding everyone through the reasoning without a hint of condescension or haste. The men listened intently, their eyes following her movements, their postures aligned with the subtle lesson being imparted, that skill, understanding, and poise can quietly assert authority and reshape perception. The office, ordinary in its layout but elevated through this quiet display of intellect and composure, became a cinematic tableau where light, sound, and human presence intertwined, each element reinforcing the subtle power of dignity and knowledge. Jinho's eyes remained on Mai, the expression of calculation now softened by recognition and appreciation for the way she had demonstrated mastery without confrontation. The gentle acknowledgement of her capability reflected in the slight incline of his head and the thoughtful rhythm of his fingers. The sunlight continued to shift, highlighting the careful balance of attention and focus in the room, and every person present experienced the impact of her calm, precise, and commanding presence. The stillness was complete, the room collectively acknowledging the quiet assertion of skill and integrity, a lesson in respect and competence that required no additional words or gestures, leaving an indelible impression that knowledge, preparation, and composure could quietly yet decisively shape understanding and influence the perceptions of all who witnessed it. The final moments in the office unfolded with a quiet, almost reverent stillness, the sunlight streaming through the tall windows, casting long patterns across the polished mahogany surfaces and the faces of those present. Mai stood with her posture poised and steady, every gesture deliberate, radiating the calm authority that had redefined the room's energy from the first moment she had engaged with the Russian note. Jinho remained seated, his gaze locked on her, the sharp angles of his face softened by a subtle recognition and respect that had grown steadily throughout the morning. The men around the table mirrored the collective acknowledgement, their expressions now a mixture of admiration and contemplation, the initial panic fully replaced by attentive focus and respect for the quiet mastery that had guided their understanding. Every soft sound, from the faint rustle of papers to the subtle movements of chairs, seemed amplified in the charged silence, underscoring the importance of the moment and the authority that Mai commanded through intellect and composure alone. She spoke one final time, her voice deliberate, precise, and calm, articulating the broader implications of the note with clarity that left no room for misunderstanding, her reasoning weaving through the details to illuminate a path of comprehension and insight. The sunlight shifted across the room, highlighting her figure and casting subtle shadows that emphasized the quiet dignity of her presence, a presence that had transformed the space and the perceptions of everyone within it. Yinhues,